Hello YouTube, and welcome to my Until Dawn Iceberg, complete with my closet cosplay, which I decided to throw together at the last minute because this wig arrived. It's for a different purpose, which is why it's so much longer than Ashley's hair, but you'll see what that's for later, if I ever complete that video essay. But for now, we have the Until Dawn Iceberg that I've created. It is terrible. The more I look at it, the more I'm like, why did I put these things in these tiers? But you know what? We're just gonna go with it. I had recorded this iceberg once already, but for some reason, when I'm talking to just my microphone instead of to a webcam, I can't talk. It takes so much editing, and I have to do so many takes to make one coherent sentence that I got through about 5 minutes of editing the hour-long video and gave up. So we're here re-recording this. However, like last time, I have no script. I'm just going to talk about various things in Until Dawn that I liked that I put on this iceberg. Feel free to make fun of how ugly the iceberg is. I know, it's horrible. I am going to link it down below. It's full on uggo, but you know, that's just how it is. So do not make fun of my rankings. I know they don't make any sense. I've done my best. I've also done my best with the categorizations. As you can see me glancing to the side, I'm looking at my iceberg in the other monitor. So I have green, canon. This is stuff that is shown in-game or is very apparent in-game. Things that we know for sure are real canon. Canon tie-in comes from official media, things like the companion app, stuff like that. Meta is things like chapter titles, the way that they change depending on your choices. That sort of thing is meta. Speculation is stuff that is speculation. It's stuff where you have some good evidence for what you're going to be talking about, but there's nothing that really supports it too much. It's still definitely very speculative. It's up for interpretation. Implications are going to be similar to meta, but they are much weaker. These are things where you can kind of put together the clues and come up with this. You think this is what they were going for, but we don't have quite enough evidence to truly say it's canon or meta. Developer info is kind of a catch-all category for anything from people involved in the game. So director, stream, interviews with the cast, things like that. So let's go ahead and just get right into tier 1. I listed this as basic canon info, common knowledge, and popular fan discussion topics. So things that people will typically have discussed if you've gone online at all, things you probably would have found in a first play, things you might have seen another YouTuber do, their comment section might have talked about, things like that. Really, really basic topics. So let's start off with everyone can live or die. This is a really well-known thing. It was kind of what the whole game was built on. Anyone can live and anyone can die in Until Dawn. You can have any combination of survivors at the end of the game. Totems. So the totems are the in-game fortune-telling mechanic. So the totems have a whole system, which I went into more detail on in my totems video, but they basically will tell you what category your totem is, whether this is a good event that you want to happen, or whether this is somebody's death, or something like that. So the interesting thing about the totems is that they exist both in-game and for the character benefit, or for the player's benefit. There is mention of these totems in one of the journals or books. I believe it's the one in the cabin when Mike and Jess go to the cabin. If you read through it, it'll talk about totems that can be placed on the mountain to try to ward against the Wendigo spirit. So these totems do exist in the game, and these characters are finding them. However, it's implied that the visions are just for us, the player, since the characters never react. Wolfie. So we know Wolfie. Wolfie is the wolf that Mike meets, and you can befriend or you can kick if you're a horrible, horrible person, or just very quick on your button press. And if you make friends with Wolfie, Wolfie will follow you around in the sanatorium in Chapter 9. He kind of serves as a free hit for Mike, but considering Mike can't die in that chapter, it really sucks if you kill Wolfie. So you can successfully get Wolfie out of the sanatorium, and you win an achievement for it. The flare gun. So the flare gun. Very contentious due to the fact that it is an extremely important item, but it depends on choices you made previously that don't really make a lot of sense as to why they would affect this. So basically, you get a totem shortly before reaching the fire tower that tells you that if you find a flare gun, Emily should hand it to Matt. So very simple totem, really easy to interpret. The problem here is that even if you do this, it doesn't always help because another choice is very important earlier on. Matt needs to have disagreed with Emily's plan to go to the fire tower for some reason, and if he does that, he will pocket the flare gun and he won't shoot it into the sky. If he agreed, he'll shoot it into the sky. It's completely worthless. He can't use it to defend himself later, and neither can Emily. So when you've done this, even if he has the flare gun pocketed, you may never see the point of the flare gun if he then jumps to safety and never encounters the Wendigo. In that case, it would have been better for Emily to have the flare gun because she can use it to protect herself later on in the game, though it is very, very difficult. Sam's multi-hour bath. So really, really simple. If you pay attention to the timestamps in Until Dawn, you can find all sorts of really interesting and terrible information, like the fact that Sam takes a bath for hours. 3 hours, something like that. It's ridiculous. Plot armor. So Until Dawn suffers terribly from plot armor issues. We can't really be too mad at it. It was one of the earlier of this type of game, and there are only so many ways to tell this type of game with these stories if you can lose your characters really, really early on. So most of the time, most characters have some level of plot armor. You typically have a character or two that are the final boy or final girl. In this case, Sam and Mike are our final archetypes. And they typically make it through most of the game so that they can continue to push the plot along. There are games where you can kill everyone pretty early on and lose a whole bunch of the game, like Detroit Become Human, for instance. You can kill all of your protagonists about 3/4 of the way in and just end the game. But in games like Until Dawn, you typically do have a few characters that survive until the end and can only die in the final scenes. So in this case, that's Sam and Mike. They can only die in Chapter 10. Don't move. So don't move segments, obviously, the bane of many, many players of this game. This is a unique feature to the PlayStation 4. Part of the reason for the exclusivity to the PS4, they wanted to make use of this don't move technology. So don't move is not that hard to beat. I hear people talking about putting their things down on the table and then the vibration getting them and all of that. So there's a few tricks to it. One, when I hold the controller, I actually have my controller here. Here we go. This is a benefit to TV, or how fucking old am I? This is a benefit to a webcam. So if you're holding the controller, jam your elbows against your chest and jam your arms together and then hold it. If you have to hold your breath, you can do that, but most of the time this is going to do it for you. You won't shake enough to move the controller. That said, some of the don't moves will track a little bit, so you'll have to gently tilt the controller. You'll get used to it. Trophy names. So the trophy names are all little horror movie jokes. They're all horror movie parodies. Let's see, off the top of my head, I can think of the Quicker Man. The trophy that you get for The Boys All Surviving is the Wicker Man parody. You have Let the Wrong One In as a movie, and then Let the Right One In as the trophy, I think. I may have that the other way around. I don't actually watch that many horror movies. I don't have the attention span, I say, as I make many, many videos for an 8-hour-long game. Linear story. So this is another thing very similar to the plot armor. There's only so many ways to tell this type of story. You do have games that can have really branching narratives, and in fact, some of Supermassive's later games, like House of Ashes, it kind of has more branching, but not a ton. You still typically have one overarching story that you're telling, and it's more characters living or dying, and then changes within particular scenes rather than the complete loss or complete gain of new scenes. So it's basically a linear story, and what really matters is which characters live, which characters die, and the types of dialogue they have. Americans. So this one is kind of multiple categories. It's not outright said in the game, but it is said in the developer information that these characters are American. It is implied in the game itself that they are from Los Angeles, most likely. This is because Josh's father is a movie producer. They all went to school together. Emily talks about shopping on Rodeo. So most likely they are from Los Angeles, or at least close by somewhere in California. And again, it is stated by the developers that they are Americans. Jess's phone. So it's not really said in the game. I don't know why I actually have this in canon. I'm actually not quite sure why I have several of these things in canon. But, past me was just on it, and I'm just not going to complain because at least this thing got done. Anyway, Jess's phone is thrown through the window of the cabin. It was done by hand ago. That's the point of this entry. Mike's fingers. So you can save Mike's fingers. He can get out of the bear trap without cutting the fingers off. This is something that a lot of people do early in the game. They just cut the fingers off because you get that scare that the wolf is coming at you, and most people aren't going to try to salvage the fingers because they're probably really mangled. You know, even if he does pry the bear trap open, they really should be a lot more mangled than they are. But it's pretty unusual to decide to open the trap so many times that you do get his fingers out, but you can. You can also just avoid the hand trap altogether. If you pay really, really close attention to one of the early totems, Scary Game Squad does this. You can go back and watch one of their Let's Plays. They actually pause the totem video to the point where they can see the hand, so they know not to touch it, and I think they touch it anyway, but I don't remember. You can definitely walk past it, however. Matt and Mike fight. So if you choose the correct set of options after Matt sees Emily and Mike hugging, if you choose that option, you can actually have Matt and Mike get into a fist fight in the lodge before Emily and Jess's fight would take place. It's pretty funny. I definitely suggest doing it at least once. Josh's fate. So pretty much everyone who's played the game knows that Josh really only has 2 endings, and it basically comes down to one clue. If you find a particular clue, Josh can recognize Hannah as the Wendigo, and she will drag him off to become a Wendigo himself. If she doesn't recognize him, she pops his head like that Game of Thrones episode. Infinite ammo. So Mike's shotgun, many people have joked about this, how he kind of just loads the shotgun, grabs a whole bunch of shells, shoves them in his pocket, and then just goes on and can shoot willy-nilly as much as he wants. There's no point in shooting the vast majority of the Wendigo in the sanatorium. But if you want to, just have at it. There is no ammo limit. You're not counting bullets until dawn. This is an infinite ammo shotgun. So live your dreams. Sam's towel. Another running joke in the fandom. Sam has superhuman goddess powers of holding her towel on. I do not know what she did to get it to attach the way that she did, but that thing is on there, and we can all learn something from her. Put the gun down. This refers to the second trap where Chris and Ashley are at the table and Chris has the gun and has to decide who to shoot. If you got a totem earlier on, you would see a vision of Chris putting the gun down on the table. But interestingly, for this totem, this is from a completely different angle than you actually get in game. So not everyone kind of makes the connection. I think this is a pretty unique totem in that aspect. I don't really remember other totems where you get a completely different angle. Some have a little bit different angle, but I heard this was because the totems use a earlier build version of footage, and that's why some of these things don't match. So it's possible that the gun trap choice was different in the initial version, and so you had that particular video, but I don't know. At any rate, that totem tells you exactly what to do, though it can be a little hard to recognize it at the time. Chapter titles. So each chapter in Until Dawn has 2 different titles, and these depend on your choices during the Dr. Hill interviews. Back when I was really doing a lot of testing on Until Dawn, a long time ago, we didn't really know all of them. There were a few that you could trigger specifically, but I believe it's been figured out how you get all of them now. I seem to remember being on the wiki and seeing that it was all listed, but it all just depends on your choices. I believe only in the Dr. Hill interviews, but it could be choices earlier on in the game. At any rate, you determine which title you get for the chapter. Soundtrack. The Until Dawn soundtrack is beautiful. Like, if you've only ever watched this game through a Let's Play, you've got to check out the soundtrack because it's the next best thing to like playing it yourself. When I played it myself for the first time, the sound blew me away, especially the music. It is so pretty. A lot of it is very, very similar, you know, kind of the Until Dawn sound, but then you have a few tracks like Icicle Elegy, which plays during the completed Totem video. Fantastic standout track. And then you have tracks like Chris and Ashley, which is really pretty and really sad. There's just lots of really, really good tracks. You should go listen to the album. And the last one for this tier is PlayStation exclusive. We all know this. It's a PlayStation exclusive. Unfortunately, that means that we don't have it on computer or anything else really good that we can mod, and that makes everybody sad because the potential for Until Dawn modding would be so much fun. However, it is stuck on the PlayStation, and it was originally developed for the PlayStation 3, but it was stuck in development hell for so long it ended up on the PlayStation 4, though that was probably a really good thing. Okay, we're on to tier 2, which is obscure canon info, tie-in games and apps, and lesser known facts. This is still stuff that I would expect you to generally know if you've poked around the fandom a bit. It's not really obscure information, it's stuff that you would find on another playthrough if you've discussed with fans, things like that. It might also be stuff you saw in Rare Choices on YouTube, things like that. So, customized phones. We're starting off with a fun one here. All the kids' phones that you see are all customized. They have their own backgrounds, they have their own phone cases. They're really cool. It's really neat when you do little touches like that. Emily has a really beautiful phone case. Chris has this cool, like, futuristic looking background on his phone. I think Josh's has like a little forest background. I'll try to include some pictures if I can find the screen caps. But yeah, it's really cool, and I really like those unique little touches for the characters. The stranger's name. So the stranger's name is never given in the game, however it was mentioned in a developer's interview. They accidentally let slip that his name is Jack. Probably Jack Fiddler. He talks about, I think, a fiddler in his journal. I think his grandfather's last name was Fiddler, and this is a reference, some sort of reference. I don't know enough about it to go into it, but his first name is Jack. The companion app. So the Until Dawn companion app is pretty cool. It has extra bios for the characters. It talks about their ages and what they want to be when they grow up. It tells a little more extra information about their personalities, things like that. I think it also includes a quiz, lets you know which character you are most like. I think it also had a tie-in to your choices at one point, but I don't believe it works anymore. I believe the companion app is still available, so I think you can still download it, but if not, you can find the information about it online pretty easily. Rush of Blood. So Rush of Blood is a tie-in game, I guess you could call it. It's a PlayStation VR, which nobody ever used in their life, ever. Okay, I'm kidding. But most people did not have PlayStation VR when this game came out. I don't know if they do now. I never kept up with it, but I do know that barely anybody played this game, at least in the Until Dawn community. It was an on-rails shooter, and it was taking place from Josh's perspective. It seemed to be in the midst of one of his delusions, and he was having a bunch of Until Dawn themed stuff happen. So, weird game. I've heard that the endings have some relevance to Until Dawn, but I still have never actually bothered to check out this game. I'm so sorry, I just do not care. Last names. However, I do care about Rush of Blood for the last names. Some of you who came into the fandom late might not know where we found out all these people's last names from. For the longest time, we didn't know the last names of any of these characters except for Mike and Josh, whose names are said in game. However, the other characters were all last nameless. Even the developers couldn't remember. They were asked and they were just like, I don't know, they had names at one point, we forgot. But in Rush of Blood, if you get a high score, you can see the leaderboards, and the leaderboards have very familiar names on them, including last names. So that's where we got everyone's last names from. Handwriting. Similar to the customized phones thing, we get to see the handwriting of a lot of different characters. I will try to pop some of these up on the screen. We see Chris's at the gate when Sam shows up. We see presumably Jess's, maybe Mike's, but presumably Jess wrote the note at the very beginning from Mike's perspective for Hannah. We see Hannah's handwriting in her diary. We see, I think that's it. I don't know. If I've forgotten anyone, I will add them. False timers. So there are a few false timers in Until Dawn, and I'm considering false timers things to be where you have the implication that there is no timer, but there is one, or you have an on-screen timer and it does not behave the way you expect it to. So the big one that I'm thinking of here is when Emily is running through the mines and she stops at the crossroads where she can go to the elevator or to a different path, and you really only have maybe a quarter to half of the timer that you actually have on the screen for when the Wendigo jumps down and scares you mid-timer. It makes a really good jump scare, honestly. And since it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't really matter that you lose that time. I want to say there's another false timer somewhere else, but I don't remember. There's also kind of the hidden timers during the Don't Move segments, but that's to be expected. The Makapitu. So the Makapitu is the particular Wendigo spirit that was possessing Hannah. It was a very powerful spirit. It's the one that chased the twins to begin with in the prologue, and Jack destroyed it after the twins fell. That released the Wendigo spirit in order to possess Hannah. He explains all of this in the totem video that you get for completing all of the totems. The Impatient. This is another Until Dawn tie-in from Supermassive that I did not play. I believe they were testing out a kind of a group play where everyone could kind of vote their choices with their phone or something like that. Really cool idea. But it was a prequel to Until Dawn, I think, following the Miners incident. So I never played it, I don't know much about it, but it exists and it does tie into Until Dawn. Clueless dialogue. So one of the best things about Until Dawn is how the dialogue will change depending on what the characters know, or what the characters don't know in this case. If you pick up as little clues as possible, you get some of the best dialogue. The characters have no idea what's happening, and they're just very confused. My favorite bit of clueless dialogue is if you pick up pretty much no clues in the sanatorium as Mike. When he meets up in the basement with Emily and Sam and Chris and all of that after the stranger dies, he will try to explain the sanatorium and say that it was really weird and there was like this stranger was living there and there were like wolves running around, and Emily looks at him and she goes, "Are you sure you weren't at a truck stop?" I'm like, yes, Emily, that's the best. It's the best line in the game, honestly. I have it up on my YouTube if you want to go see it for yourself, but it is glorious. And there is lots of dialogue like that. So if you have the game and you want to play through, I definitely suggest a fail all non-essential QTEs and collect no clues run. They are both amazing and very, very funny. Basement photos. So the basement photos are the photos that are hung up in the basement when you're playing as Chris and Ashley, trying to find Sam. A lot of players find these and they're very confused, and for good reason. There are 6 photos when there are 8 characters. One of these characters will have their eyes scratched out. Oftentimes it's a character that you think is dead by that point, like Emily or Josh, but it can just be someone seemingly random and you don't know what has happened or why these characters are chosen. This relates to your least liked character. So the character with their eyes scratched out was your most hated character during the Dr. Hill segments. I don't know about the rest of the 6. I think they're all your bottom rankings, and the 2 favored characters are not included, but I might be wrong there. But I know that the one with the eye scratched out is your least favorite. PlayStation 5 glitches. So I don't have a PlayStation 5 myself, but I have seen a lot of glitches posted on the subreddit from people trying to play Until Dawn on their PS5. It is supposed to be compatible, but it does not always work. My favorite glitch has been the neon green sky. So if you're getting weird glitches on your PS5, you are not alone. Play the character. So play the character here just kind of refers to the fact that Until Dawn, unlike most of the games in Supermassive's series or a game like Detroit, it actually wants you to play the character to their personality traits. With a few small exceptions or arguable points, if you play the character to their character traits, you will get the best outcome every time. So a really good example of this is Chris. Chris is methodical, protective, and humorous. If you remember these 3 traits, then chances are you'll make every right decision with Chris. Of course, there is no right decision in the Josh versus Ashley choice, but there is a right decision. There are 2 right decisions, actually, in the gun trap. Both of them rely on remembering that Chris is protective, and if he does not shoot somebody, which he shouldn't if you play the character, then you get a good outcome. One example is for Ashley. She is academic and inquisitive. The academic part kind of implies you should really be paying attention to that book. Although the inquisitive would lure you toward the trapdoor, you should know not to open it. So again, it's a little bit hard to kind of say, but in general, if you try to play the character to their personality traits, you're typically going to get a good outcome. Rare deaths. So this refers to particularly unusual deaths. There are a few really rare things that can happen. I would categorize Mike being knocked off the... Not Mike. I would categorize Matt being knocked off the cliff by the deer to be one of these rare deaths. I would also consider the lodge deaths, the ones not caused by the fire, but the ones where Emily or Ashley could be attacked and killed by the Wendigo in the lodge. That was one that I would consider a rare death. Chris being attacked by the Wendigo in the tunnels is a pretty rare death. Things like that. So there are quite a few really obscure deaths that can happen. Rare dialogue. Same case here. You can have some really rare dialogue options. There are also moments where you have unusual dialogue happen because of unusual choices that affect your relationships. So, for instance, there's the rare dialogue where Emily says something flippant in the cable car station and Matt asks her why she's being so bitchy. There's also another version with Emily when she and Matt meet up with Chris and Ashley after the saw trap. She suggests going to the fire tower or to the lodge or something, I don't remember, and Chris accuses her of just trying to save herself, and she has to tell him that she's not. She's trying to be logical. She's trying to just think of the best way to get them out of this. It's a really interesting moment because she's very patient and pretty nice, honestly, even though Chris has outright accused her of being a selfish jerk. I think she figured out, he might be a little bit off in the moment. But it's a nice moment for her character. And there's lots of little dialogue, things like that are pretty rare and don't come up very often because people just don't make the right choices for them, or they just are very unusual circumstances. Jess Matt determinate scene. So pretty much everyone knows about this one. It probably could have gone on the other tier, but Jess and Matt have a fully determinate scene that you can play as one of the two characters, depending on how many of them are still alive, in Chapter 10. So if Jess has survived into Chapter 10, she will be in the mines. If Matt has also survived until Chapter 10, so will he. If they are both alive, you play as Matt. If just Jess is alive, you play as Jess. If just Matt is alive, you play as Matt, and he's alone. So the choices in this section are very similar, but there are small variations in each, and you do get, of course, more dialogue when you have both characters together. This is a pretty hard scene to survive the first time you play. It involves choosing the right choices, hitting a very fast QTE, and then a few don't move sections. It can all be a lot to trip up a new player, though if you know what you're doing, this is a pretty easy scene to get through otherwise. Totem video. So I mentioned this briefly earlier during the soundtrack and during the Makapitu, but there is a video that you get if you have gotten all of the totems. So if you've collected all the totems, you go back into your totem screen and it'll say the totem video, and you press play video and you'll get the entire backstory of what happened in the prologue from Jack's perspective. It's pretty cool. It fills in a lot of the story gaps. Sam is vegan. So this is from Hayden Panettiere herself. In one of the interviews, she states that Sam is vegan. So I remember fandom having a lot of fun with this, not really at the expense of being vegan. There's nothing wrong with being vegan, but just at the idea of these particular characters. They would be so obnoxious. Pre-order DLC. So if you pre-order the game, you get an entire extra scene where you play as Matt, as he and Emily try to go find Emily's missing bag. So this is actually a really cute scene, and it sucks that the main game doesn't get it because it builds a lot for both Matt and Emily's characters. It shows you kind of why they would be in a relationship together, what it's like when things are going well with them, how sweet they can be. It's very cute. It's very character building. It only comes, of course, with the pre-order, unless, I guess, you buy it on the PlayStation Store in Europe or something. I've been seeing reports from the Until Dawn subreddit that people are getting this scene, and it seems to be buying the European version on PlayStation Now. I don't know. I haven't tested it, obviously. I don't live in Europe, so I can't really test it. But that's what I've heard. Misdiagnosed. So this speculation entry is one I want to be kind of careful about because armchair psychology, but there's a big speculation in Until Dawn's fandom that Josh was misdiagnosed. You can find his detailed medical info if you're playing as Sam and you escape from him during the chapter where she's running from him. I don't remember, chapter 5 or something like that. You can find his lair and you can find all of his notes. You can find his phone. You can find his medical records. And if you go through them, you'll find that Josh was diagnosed with, I believe, clinical depression. But his symptoms are very unusual in terms of what we see in the game versus what depression typically gives you. So there is some fandom speculation that perhaps he was misdiagnosed and that was part of the tragedy of everything that went wrong for him. So there is a flip side to this theory that we'll get to in a later tier, but that's what this theory is about, basically. Time for Tier 3. Tier 3 includes rare canon info, implied information, meta, and speculation. Good gosh, my computer's loud. So it's just, more obscure stuff. more obscure information, slightly more tenuous reaches of speculation, things like that. Reused animation. So, for as good as Until Dawn is, there are some spots where they have reused their animation. It's just for little things. You probably wouldn't even notice the first time around. You just notice it when you play it multiple times. But there is a particular scene that is really, really noticeable because the two scenes where it's used are in the same chapter. So when Josh gets into the water following Mike as they're trying to escape the mines, he kind of recoils like it's cold. He kind of like goes like this, and then he puts his hands down. Sam does the exact same animation later on as she's running back to the lodge and she gets in that cold pool. She does the same hand thing. It's so distinctive that it's really, really easy to tell. I can't think off the top of my head of other places of reused animation, but I know they exist. Oh wait, yes I can. There is almost an exact reuse of animation in the Wendigo chase scene where Chris is running from the Wendigo after Jack loses his head. If you shoot Jack's tanks and cause the explosion, and then you shoot the barrel on the way back to the lodge and cause the explosion, Chris's animation is basically identical. Even his voice line, one of them is identical. He says more stuff, in one of the scenes, but you can definitely hear and see that they reused that. Fire tower collapse felt in the lodge. So this is kind of an inference. This is kind of a neat one. So when Chris and Ashley are exploring in the basement, there is a scene where they'll be going through a room and they'll hear like a boom or something in the distance, and you'll see dust rain down from the ceiling. And they'll be like, what was it? But they never know, and no one ever says. But if you look at the timestamps and try to line them up, it does look like this could be the collapse of the fire tower. So it's really hard to tell because the chapter with Chris and Ashley starts quite a bit earlier, but quite a bit of time passes. So we don't really get a recent timestamp for them the way that we do for Matt and Emily as the fire tower collapses. So it's hard to say for sure, but they happen within the same hour. So it's very likely that that boom that they feel is the fire tower collapse, which I think is a really cool little detail. Emily isn't bitten. So this is a rare option, but Emily can avoid being bitten by the Wendigo. The conditions for this are that she has the flare gun and that she is far ahead of the Wendigo while running, but not too far. So I don't remember the exact sequence of events. I think you have multiple exact sequences that you can do, but Emily needs to be running from the Wendigo throughout the mines. She needs to succeed in some areas, fail in others, pick certain options. Like I believe you have to jump the rock grinder for this to work. But you basically need the Wendigo to be close enough that it's within her sight, but not so close that she doesn't have time to shoot it. So if you get that and you can hit that tiny, tiny little target in the short amount of time you have, she can fire the flare gun, scare off the Wendigo, and return to the lodge without being bitten. If she does this, it just skips the section in the basement where they talk about her bite. So the scene where Ashley goes, what is that? To the basically the end where Mike leaves just kind of gets cut. And it's so awkward. It's extremely obvious that something was meant to go there. They did not do a lot of work to make this particular option blend. We'll say that. Chapter 10, Immunity. So, in Chapter 10, pretty much everyone can die. Even the final boy and final girl who've had plot armor up to this point can die. In fact, there is only one character who cannot die in Chapter 10, no matter what. And that's Chris. If Chris makes it to Chapter 10, he is out. He bails on the lodge before anything can happen. He leaves all these other losers behind, and he's out. So, as long as Chris makes it to Chapter 10, he will survive. Run/lock the basement door. So this is something I didn't know about until recently when I made my totems video. I had seen just before that totems video on the Until Dawn subreddit about the difference between the choices to run or lock the door in the basement during Chapter 10 right before the big lodge finale. So the Wendigo are running through the hall, and Sam has that choice to lock or run. And it actually does make a difference. So if you lock the door on the Wendigo, when Sam rushes up and has to do her Don't Move segment, the Don't Move segment is longer than the alternative, because in the alternative, the Wendigo come up and distract Handigo earlier. They do come up and distract her in this version as well, the version where you lock the door, but it takes them like 5 seconds longer or something like that. So there is a difference there, and it's really interesting. The real Dr. Hill. So Dr. Hill in the game, as we know him, is a hallucination, as is revealed late in the game during one of Josh's scenes, chapter 9, chapter 10, something like that. However, Dr. Hill is a real person, and he seems to be a really nice person. He seems to be really trying to help Josh. You can see his text messages to Josh, you can see his file in Josh's medical records, things like that, again, if you're playing Sam and you find Josh's lair after escaping him. So there is a real Dr. Hill, and he was probably a pretty nice guy. Most hated. So everyone knows basically that you choose a most hated character. It happens really early on in a Dr. Hill session, like third chapter or something like that. And we talked briefly about the basement photos, but if you choose particular characters, you actually get rare dialogue in chapter 9 or chapter 10 where you get Dr. Hill again. He talks about why Josh would have hated these particular people. And it's really interesting because as far as I know, there's only dialogue for if you chose Josh. A lot of people will have seen this dialogue because it was in Markiplier's Let's Play. He says something about how it's yourself you despise, you've already admitted that much. And that's neat. I knew that existed for a long time because I saw Markiplier play it, but I had no idea there was special dialogue for Ashley. I had chosen Ashley as my most disliked character during a run while I was doing Rare Choices, back when the world stats worked. And I was shocked to get extra dialogue. Dr. Hill asks Josh why he hated her so much. She did nothing to him or something like that. And I had a feeling then that Chris would also have rare dialogue, and he does. Josh is asked by Dr. Hill if he was his best friend, why did he hate him so much or something like that. So then I expected Sam to have rare dialogue as well, but she didn't. There's no comments on if you pick Sam. And I've seen enough people choose Emily or Jess that I know there's no dialogue for them, and I don't think there's dialogue for Matt or Mike either. But I thought that was really interesting. I have all those clips up on my YouTube if you want to go look for them. So they're neat little clips. Chris can't miss. So this is slightly debated, but I'll get into it. So the idea here is that if Chris survives the game, he can't have missed a shot with any of the guns that he uses. So this includes the shooting range. You can't fail out of the shooting range. You have to successfully shoot the targets. And since you can't misfire, he hits every time. Then you have the gun trap is next. He would have hit himself or Ashley, but they were blanks. Same thing as when he shoots at Josh incoming. He clearly would have hit. And he does hit the apparatus when he shoots above him. But again, it's all the blanks, so you really can't tell. The contested moment is if he has the gun when Jack comes through the door and you fire. I don't think he misfires in that scene. I think you just don't fire no matter what you do, but I could be wrong there. So it's possible there's a miss there in that scene. And then, of course, during the Wendigo chase, he has to hit every shot in order to survive. So basically, this all means that Chris is the best shot of the group, which pretty cool. Ouija board ghost. So the Ouija board ghost. This is the apparition that appears in the background during the Ouija board scene. At just the right time, you can see a ghostly figure standing behind Ashley in the corner. So the interesting thing about this is that we know Josh creates the ghost that we see in the basement, but it's unclear if he created the ghost in the Ouija board scene. Neither Ashley nor Chris ever see this ghost, so it seems weird that Josh would have gone through all the trouble to set it up to scare them, but they would never have seen it. Also, I don't know how he would have been controlling it. So since Until Dawn does have supernatural elements to it, it's entirely possible that this was a real apparition and not Josh's prank. However, it could easily have been Josh's prank as well, so we really, really don't know. Emily's discoveries. Depending on the clues that you pick up in the minds as Emily, you can have really different responses to Chris's questions. There's a YouTuber called Alpha Axolotl who did a lot of testing of this and found a whole bunch of dialogues. I didn't even know about all of them. I knew that you could get a rare dialogue for the phone, and I think I knew of another rare dialogue, but this YouTuber did a really good job testing the different options and showing you which clues you pick up and which you don't to get which dialogue. So there's lots of little moments like that in the game. Just in general, Emily has some really unusual dialogue options. She can make some really interesting discoveries in the mines. She can make interesting discoveries on the mountains, like finding Beth's phone, things like that. That results in its own dialogue. I think Emily probably has the most varied dialogue of any character based on the clues that she can find. Josh's motivations. So this is a hotly debated topic, which basically comes down to, what was Josh trying to accomplish? He targeted the three most innocent people, and you can argue that he was trying to set Ashley and Chris up, which I think he definitely deluded himself into thinking that he was, and that he was trying to make Chris the star of the show and Sam the star of the show and all of that. But it doesn't make any sense with his stated motivations, where he wants them to feel what his sisters felt and all of that. It's weird. It's very, very weird. Josh's motives don't make any sense. My personal theory on this is that he started wanting to have revenge on the group, but as it went along and as he tried to plan it, he realized they were all such wild cards. It was just really hard to predict and control that group, even if he split them all up. And the only people that he could reliably predict the choices and actions of were Chris and Sam, his two closest. He knew Sam would be in the bath for hours. He knew that Chris would go after Ashley and then refuse to leave without Sam and go back for Sam. And he could predict these two and therefore be able to predict that his traps would work. It's possible that he had other plans. I know that there's fan speculation that maybe he had set up a secret camera or something in the cabin, and that then he would blackmail Mike and Jess. And honestly, I can see that. That would at least make logical sense. But as it is right now, Josh's motives make no sense at all. Ashley's choice. So this is another really hotly debated topic, and this refers to Ashley's decision to lock Chris out during the Wendigo chase if he shot at her. So people will say that she froze in shock. However, the developers have said that is not the case. They have said that Ashley made a deliberate choice. That said, she was acting out of trauma. It's not to dismiss how traumatized she is by these events, or how much what's happened has changed her and caused her to make these strange decisions. She should be treated with some sympathy here, but she did purposefully and knowingly and willingly lock Chris out, which personally I think makes her so much more interesting. What a fascinating character that she could do something like that, especially when you have her being this like shy, sweet, nervous little bookworm the whole time, and then she's like, bitch, bye. I love it. It is a great aspect to her character. There is no need to explain it away. There is no need to go, oh my god, Ashley, she's so sweet, she would never do something like that. I mean, just let her have this flaw. It's awesome. It's an awesome flaw. And then it's even better if she also then, lies to Emily about the bite. And you have Ashley take this shift into like this super survivalist, like conniving thing. It's just so cool. She's a great character. She's super interesting. But yes, basically the developers said that she did not freeze in shock. This was a specific purposeful action, but that she is acting out of a traumatic response. So, interesting little things about Ashley. Hypothermia. So, a lot of people wonder why the Until Dawn kids did not freeze to death. And really, pretty good question. There are some scenes that are quite questionable, like Mike going to the sanatorium from the mines. He was probably really, really cold. And then also Jess waking up in the mines, especially if she is just in her underwear. However, there are some other factors to consider. Mines and cave systems and things like that, if they're not really exposed to the air, they do maintain a constant temperature of like 50 or 60 degrees, which can definitely still cause hypothermia, but it's not as cold as you might expect it to be. Also, a lot of these kids are young and athletic, so Mike probably just didn't spend enough time outside, even though it was a long distance. He probably just got inside fast enough, and then he found a coat and things like that. Sam could easily live through getting in the cold water. since she immediately got back to the lodge after sprinting, things like that. I don't think any of them would have died of hypothermia. Jess is probably the most stretchy case, but Jess also survived falling who knows how far into the mines. So I think we can just decide that Jess is better than us. She's built different, and we can just move on. How many Wendigo? So this refers to the fact that you can actually calculate how many Wendigo are on the mountain at any given time. This is really useful for fanfiction writers and for people writing games or choose your own adventures after the canon. I don't remember the calculations off the top of my head, but I think it was 12 miners plus 1 Makapitu to produce 13 Wendigo. And then Jack, captured 5 of them or something. I think he, destroyed 3 of them or something, and then he destroyed the Makapitu, and then basically, it's all in his notebook, and then you can count how many Wendigo you encounter in the sanatorium. You can keep track of how many Wendigo are destroyed, and therefore their spirits have been freed. Blah, 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 how many are destroyed in the lodge. I believe that at final count, there still should be 1 or 2 active physical-bodied Wendigo on the mountain, plus Josh, if he is still around after canon. But the majority of them would be Wendigo spirits at that point. PS3 version. So I briefly touched on this. This was originally a PS3 game, and it was wild. Just looking at the characters and their character designs back from the PS3 version, pretty great. There's a lot of old demo footage, old beta footage that still exists. I believe there's a YouTuber who is playing through a PS3 build. I don't know how they got a hold of it, but if I can remember, I will link them below, and so you can go check them out. Yeah, it's wild. There were a few actors that had been signed on the whole time. Chris's actor was, and I want to say maybe Brett Dalton, who played Mike. I want to say he was also on. I've heard conflicting reports about Ella Latini, who played the twins. I could have sworn she was originally part of it, and then somebody said that she said in a stream that she wasn't, but I haven't been able to verify any of that. So a lot of the characters were recast, of course, and their appearances were changed, but a few of them still look the same from the very beginning. Character spheres. So the character spheres refers to the fact that depending on your choices with Dr. Hill, you may be able to get him to tell you what the character's canon fears are. A lot of people get mics, so a lot of people know that you can get mics. Mics is very common. I remember when I was doing my testing for the routes that would lead to which characters, my notepad just said all routes lead to Mike, because it was so common to get mics. I never did complete testing on that, but you're going to get mics most of the time. So Mike's fear is isolation. It's implied this is also Josh's fear, just based on things that Dr. Hill says. Things like, oh, you're all alone now, and all of that. Can you feel how cold your loneliness has become? Things like that. So he implies that Josh's fear is also being alone. We have 2 other characters who share the same fear. So if you're saying that Mike and Josh share the same fear, then these 2 are not unique. But as far as canon goes, the only characters we know to share fear are Chris and Emily, interestingly enough. Both of them fear failure. Ashley fears the darkness, and Sam fears the supernatural. So really interesting little character notes. There, for some reason, do not appear to be fears for Matt or Jess, sadly. I've never found them. I don't think anyone else has. It's possible they're in there for a really obscure combination of choices, but I don't know. Someday I'll go back and test the rest of the routes. So I was editing and I realized I had forgotten 2 entire entries. I'm going to blame the light on my webcam for making me too blind to be able to have seen them, but I'm going to cover them here now. They're both going to be pretty brief. Twin status glitch. So this is a glitch I had known about for a long time. It circulated on Tumblr for a short time, and it wasn't reproducible. Nobody else had encountered this particular glitch, but this glitch basically put Hannah and Beth back into the status screen for your character. When you would pause and look at the relationships, you would have relationships for Beth and Hannah, which was wild. But as I said, nobody had been able to reproduce this glitch, and it was kind of brushed off as potentially a hoax or something like that. But on Reddit, recently, several people have reproduced this glitch, It seems to occur in Chapter 9, and it seems to occur with unpatched versions of the game disc and with PS Now versions of the game. Probably the wrong build was uploaded or something like that. Anyway, it causes the status screen to include Beth and Hannah. It also can cause a different glitch, which I don't know if is related or not, but it basically erases the player's game and replaces it with some sort of weird default game. So characters will come back to life or die if they had been alive. Very, very weird. But there's something wrong with Chapter 9. That's where everything goes wrong, and I am hoping to reproduce this error myself, hopefully soon, and have a video on it. Withdrawal symptoms. So this is the other Josh one that I was talking about, and this is how I realized that I had never covered this. I'm going to go very briefly over this one because just like the other Josh one, I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to armchair diagnose here. However, in Josh's medical files, you can find that the medication that he was taking, he stopped taking it very suddenly, and there are specific withdrawal symptoms to that medication that can cause symptoms very similar to what you see him go through in Until Dawn. So instead of being misdiagnosed, it's possible that Josh is just having very severe withdrawal symptoms. Okay, we are on to Tier 4. This is very obscure info and speculation. So, we have 4 entries on here. The first one is Neil Newbin motion capture, which is probably not as obscure as would really go on this tier, but I had to fill this tier with something. I had no idea that Neil Newbin had done the capture until I saw behind the scenes where he was doing the cool action roll that Chris does underneath the branch during the Wendigo chase where he's holding the shotgun. So Neil had filmed that. If the name sounds familiar to you, Neil also played Kamsky and Gavin in Detroit Become Human. He is in a lot of games and movies and things like that. He's a really talented motion capture artist and voiceover artist and martial artist, I think. I think he does parkour, all sorts of stuff. Very cool. He seems to have done a lot of the action scenes for Until Dawn, so really neat. Wendigo Exorcism. So this one is on here just because it's a huge fandom one, or at least it was when I was big in the fandom. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat here, Wendigo are not Christian demons, okay? Let's just get that right on the table there. There is no real reason to think a standard exorcism that is focused on driving a spirit out would work on a Wendigo. I don't know that much about real Wendigo lore, but there is real Wendigo lore, and it's not Christian lore. So this topic is a little bit tenuous. That said, if we want to really suspend some disbelief here, on top of the disbelief we've already suspended to be involved in Until Dawn, the idea of being able to drive the Wendigo spirit out of a character is really interesting. Really neat potential. I just wish people kind of took a more interesting route with it, I guess, rather than just have it be kind of like, oh, it's a standard exorcism. But no, it leads to some pretty cool potential, honestly. I've seen some pretty cool fan works based on this idea. There is nothing, however, in the game to indicate that this is possible. Chris's role in the prank. So, this is a big one. It's very, very interesting. This is something that's been kind of debated in fandom for a while for various reasons. One is that Chris was targeted by Josh during the prank, so we would assume there should be a reason for it. This led people to wonder if perhaps Chris was involved with the prank, even though he wasn't an active member of it. Perhaps his job was to keep Josh out of the way by getting both the boys drunk and then them just being passed out at the countertop and therefore not available to stop the prank. Now, I never liked this theory. I thought it sucked. Seemed to go against pretty much everything Chris has as a character, but you couldn't really disprove it. And Chris's dialogue does indicate throughout the game that he feels guilty for what happened. He uses we when talking about the prank, and you could interpret this as Chris's guilt, whether or not it's founded guilt, or as him not using the accusatory you statement when talking to Ashley. So instead of saying, oh, you look like you were really enjoying yourself, or something like that, he he uses we to make it less accusatory, though he does outright accuse her at one point. He says something like, I forgot you were such a willful participant, or something like that. But in truth, Chris was originally part of the prank. He was originally under the bed with Emily or Jess or both of them, I don't know. But he was involved. Early footage showed the scene where he and Ashley find the projector and they find the video of that night. And it shows him under the bed. So Chris was at some point, in fact quite late in production probably, involved in the prank. However, he was specifically removed from being part of the prank. Most likely after all of his dialogue was recorded. So dialogue is typically recorded quite early on when the mocap is happening and all of that. For the game to basically be finished with finished textures and then be having this pretty late stage demo and then take him out, it had to have been quite late in production that they changed their mind. So he was very, very purposefully removed from being part of the prank. Personally, I feel like this is because the developers also saw that this doesn't make any sense for Chris's character. There's no reason why he would have ever been involved in something like this, so they took him out. But I think it's a really, really interesting thing, a really, really interesting little point in the development, and a really interesting thing about Chris's character. So we can say probably for sure that Chris was not involved in any way in the prank. If the developers had wanted him to be involved in it, they would have left him being involved, as opposed to specifically removing him from it. They removed him for a reason, and therefore it's very unlikely that he was tasked with getting Josh drunk or something like that. And for our last entry, we have the Halloween event. I don't know how many people will remember this event, but it happened way early on. Basically, there was an update to Until Dawn, and everyone was like, oh my god, there's going to be an update. They're going to give us the DLC. We're going to get something cool. They're going to give us, like, extra scenes. We're going to get this and that. And then you download the update on Halloween, and it's pumpkins. They just, like, hid a bunch of pumpkins around the game. It was stupid as hell. You don't even get, like, a trophy or anything for them. I'm pretty sure I still have some screen caps reblogged on my Tumblr somewhere. Yeah. It's just fucking pumpkins, dude. Like... It was the biggest letdown. It's such a fucking mess. It was so stupid. Yeah, the pumpkin update. I don't think they've ever updated it with pumpkins again. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe they do this every year, but my god. The pumpkin update. Good times. Good times in Until Dawn. Well, I would like to thank you all for making it through this video. I had fun recording it. It was actually more fun the second time than the first time, and I only stuttered over my words a little bit. So I hope that you guys had a good time. I hope you learned something fun or interesting. Thank you for watching this long and ridiculous video. I appreciate it. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.